Thank you for being born. And in being born into the family system that together we belong to, thank you for iterating the inevitable imperfections in all systems and the inevitable imperfections in everyone who applies a system. So there's two levels of flaw. One is in the design of the system, and the other is in the application, the implementation of the system. And I, as a parent, embody both of those flaws. My model of reality is imperfect, and my integrity, the integrity with which I apply my model, is also imperfect. And so there's two levels of flaw. The first is innate to all systems, and the second is the imperfectness, sometimes known as hypocrisy or betrayal or unfairness with which I apply the systems that I espouse. And what I want to do in this series of videos is iterate an aspect of my family system that was not offered to me. So this series of videos was never made by my father for me. And so while many of the flaws in the family system continue through me and are passed down, there are elements. This is the element of grace, the element of evolution, and of improvement in the iteration of design that each generation can refine before giving to the next generation. And the way that I visualize this is we start with the perfect sphere, in this case represented as a circle. And it is too complex and too simple to be conscious of, because if we call this sphere all that is, what is, it's unconscious, it's too simple. How are you feeling? All that is. It's too simple. On the other hand, the sphere represents the infinite complexity, because you can divide a sphere, you can refract a sphere into an infinite number of dots or an infinite number of planes or lines that are used to generate the sphere. And now we're moving into system thinking. The masculine face of the one is the particle, the one that is composed out of an infinite number of dots, and the one that is composed out of an infinite number of lines. Now this is also, the infinite is too complex to be conscious of within the framework of language. Now, we do not have the capacity to deal with it. And so the dumbed down version of reality is a system that has enough distinctions to bring about some consciousness, not so many distinctions that it's too complex to grasp, and not so few that you're not aware of it. You know, if somebody says, how are you feeling? And you say, I'm feeling good, it's a very crude level. I'm feeling good, I'm feeling bad. That's a very simple system. You just got here, and it doesn't illuminate much. What are you feeling good about? Are you feeling good physically, emotionally, financially, socially? What is the good? Have you spent all your money? Is that good? Have you made a lot of money? Have you invested a lot of money? Why is that good? See, now we're getting into distinctions, and we're getting into intimacy. Into me, you see. And so you're inheriting a family system that has a certain number of patterns. So there are certain numbers of patterns. And they kind of work, meaning the patterns are good enough to have kept most of the family members alive for long enough to get to this point in evolution. We can say that. Because if any one of our family ancestors died, in terms of the parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, if any of their systems were not adequate to conceive a child and raise a child to childbearing age, you and I would not exist. And so it is an adequate system to survive, and maybe, better than that. But it's definitely good enough to survive because we're here. I'm here, and if you're listening to this, you are also here. Now, it's not necessarily a balanced system. It's not necessarily a very symmetrical system. So we've got bumps. If you imagine the family system as a car tire, this is a pretty crude, tire to go around. It's not the grace of the infinite sphere. It's a crude, workable system. And you have an evolutionary job within this system. And it is this. Number one, as an infant, as a child, you have and unconditionally accept and ingest the system with all of its gifts and with all of its flaws. You make that system a part of you in order to survive and in order to relate to your caregivers and your parents. That is what you do and what you did as an infant, as a child. Now, as a child moving into adolescence, you are acutely aware in a dependent relationship, which generates feelings of helplessness and frustration and powerlessness. You are acutely aware and amplify every one of the family system's flaws, of which there are many. My family system flaws included the flaw of not admitting that there were many flaws, which is excruciatingly frustrating because I was experiencing suicidal levels of pain by age 14 and plotting various ways out of that, whether it was leaving home in this capacity or in the ultimate capacity of taking my own life, but was surrounded by superhuman parents who couldn't make any mistakes, apparently, right? And so this is an example of what you are going to be doing and are doing to one degree or another in the form of iteration. So my parents gave me an imperfect system, and I'm giving you an imperfect system. However, the system is slightly better. Why? Because it's 10 times more difficult to grasp and respond to the many flaws within the system when acknowledging the flaws will get you punished. Is not happening, right? When the parent is not acknowledging that there are flaws in the system and will punish you if you acknowledge there are flaws in the system, it trained my body to feel afraid of death if I confronted the flaws, the dishonesty, the corruption in the application and design of the system in my parents. Because as an infant, as a child, I understood clearly, as all infants do, that my parents could kill me, because all parents can kill their infants if they have a mind to. And so there's a negotiation biologically. There are certain things that start to emerge out of the infant, but if they produce a rage or a fear or a dissociation or a violence, a violation at an intensity where I or you or any infant gets the awareness, I'm heading into the terrain which my caregivers, my parents, cannot deal with. They're losing it. They don't know how to deal with me in this expression of me. And the problem is that if they don't know how to deal with me, and they don't know how to deal with not knowing how to deal with me, and so they default to what does the system say? Does it say traumatize the child, rage at the child, punish the child, shame the child? What does the family system do when the child presents faces of itself that the parents, A, can't deal with, and B, can't deal with not being able to deal with? So they may not, so I don't know how to deal with this, I feel powerless and frustrated. But in the family system, powerlessness and frustration is not tolerated. It's unlovable, it's unacceptable. And so now all of the weight of the intergenerational family system is focused on the enemy, which is the infant that is bringing up an unacceptable face of the family system. And so I learned very clearly that I could die if I went into certain phases of who I am. And so I developed what's called the adaptive personality. The adaptive personality is not the authentic personality. It's not a correct mathematical equation, because feelings and physiology initially are correct mathematical equations. They reflect exactly what's going on. There's a reactivity. If you take a monkey and put 200 volts on the monkey will scream or leap violently or attack the wires or scratch the face of the sociopath that's putting the wires on them. That's normal, healthy survival behavior for a monkey. However, in a dependent relationship in a cage where the monkey depends on the sociopath in the white lab coat to deliver the food, etc., they may dissociate. They will, if this results in a lack of food or further voltage or punishment from the scientist, then the monkey may develop, try out a variety of things, and will figure out what is necessary to put forward in order to survive. And so every child, every infant goes through that adaptive process of learning what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and then learning to game the system. If mom hits you when you tell her that she just lied to you because she just lied to you and you don't like it, she hits you because you tell her she lied to you, but she gives you a candy if you apologize for her lying to you, then you start apologizing every time she lies to you, which is not an authentic it makes no sense except in the context of brainwashing. And so you and I have learned an adaptive series of responses to deal with the insanity, the schizophrenia, the absurdity, the stupidity, the unconsciousness of a highly imperfect system. Now, as you move towards adolescence, every one of my mistakes, every one of the unconscious family protocols that come through me to you from our lineage, our cultural lineage and our personal lineage, every one of these mistakes is amplified 100 times more than it would be if you were of legal age with a high degree of confidence and freedom to pick your own friends, your own place to live, your own lifestyle, etc. Once you have reached the point of autonomy, that you can sustain the person you want to be and live the life you want to live independently, then all of my flaws and all of our family system flaws and all of our cultural flaws are not that big of a deal. You just look at it with pity and say, pity the fools who still believe this and are doing this and are trapped in this, horrific rat race of stupidity. And you're free of it. So you can have compassion and empathy for the people who are still stuck in the maze. Now, by contrast, as an adolescent, grasping the unfairness, the injustice, the stupidity, the hypocrisy, the sheer cruelty of the way that you are being treated. You'd like to be treated like this, but you are instead being treated like this. And in a dependent relationship, every single one of these things are grating on your nerves, are sources of tremendous frustration, rage, depression, despair, because you're not yet independent. And this is your time to note what you do not want to pass on to your own children. Because if you do not note it, if you do not understand, A, why the system is the way it is, why you will default to that system, as each generation does unless they break apart. If you do not note that, and what you want to have different, then you will pass on this ugly, structure identically to the way it was given to you. And so the adolescent stage in evolution is antithesis. The child state is sympathy, adoption, and acceptance because everyone else is eating this, so I'll eat this too. If you're born in Japan and everyone's eating fish and noodles, rice, you eat fish, noodles, and rice. And if someone asks you, an adolescent, what do you enjoy eating? Fish, noodles, and rice. Now, if you're raised in another culture where they eat grasshoppers, what's a nutritious snack? Have a few grasshoppers with curry on them or whatever it is. If it's pizza, have a pizza. You just copy. As an infant, as a child, you learn the language that is spoken around you. You learn the diet that is eaten around you. You learn the habits and mannerisms that are done around you. And the root word of every culture is cult, for very good reason. That the blind conformity of every cult is the basis for the unconscious elements in all culture. We eat this because we eat this, and that's why we eat this. There's no intelligence. At one point, there may have been some connection. This is the food that grows well in this area. But now with international food, why are we still eating it? Because we do. Because it has become an identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is familiar, that is from the family. And that's why we do it. Makes no sense, and yet that's the default mode. There's a region in your brain, there's a region in my brain that's called the default network. And it's where the unconscious, repetitious elements of our identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that we identify with, it resides. And that default mode network obscures and blocks out all conflicting data that would say, well, why don't we get up and do this and sleep these hours and eat this food and talk like this rather than the way we have before? Because all identities contain suffering. And most of the identities on the planet today contain massive amounts of unnecessary pain, loneliness, fear of that pain and loneliness, and stupidity. So pick 100 patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that various people will say, that's me. Just throw the dice, pick 100 patterns, and 99% of them or more, meaning you just randomly pick any one of 100 people. And if you analyze the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, that person who says, that's me, the one who does those things, if you analyze the pattern, you will find massive amounts of stupidity, massive amounts of pain, massive amounts of loneliness, and massive amounts of fear of that pain and loneliness. At the same time, the person afraid of that pain and loneliness is creating the pain and loneliness by thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in the way that is guaranteed to create massive amounts of pain, loneliness, and fear of pain and loneliness. So you look at that and you say, why don't you let go of that identity and develop a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that has less pain, loneliness, and thus fear of pain and loneliness? And you'll find the very people who are afraid of massive amounts of pain and loneliness, including myself, will hold on very tightly to the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that creates the pain and loneliness they're so afraid of. So you say, that's nuts. And right back at you. You are in massive amounts of pain, fear, or pain and loneliness, and fear of pain and loneliness. And why not change? Why not do this, this, and this differently? You will confront what every ego confronts, which is the fear of the unknown. I don't know who I am if I don't talk the same as I did yesterday, think the same as I did yesterday, because all words come from thought, and all thought comes from language. So if I talked differently, I would think differently. If I thought differently, I would talk differently. And then I wouldn't know who I was. I'd be a different person. Correct. But if you iterated up rather than iterated down, you'd be a more intelligent person. A more intelligent person who spends less energy creating pain and loneliness and more energy creating love, gratitude, healing, delight, enthusiasm. You'd be more intelligent. Why don't you do that? Well, it's not me. I don't want to let that go. So that's not who I am. I am the one who thinks this, feels this because I think this, feels this because I do this, feels this and thinks this when I say this, and shows up like this. I'm that one. If I wasn't that, I wouldn't be me. And that's exactly what your parents and your cult say to you. Why do we have to go to this dumb school to learn these idiotic subjects by these dumb teachers that are so dumb they do not even grasp that they are dumb, you might ask your parents or your cult? And the answer is always the same. That's the way we do things. Why? Because that's the way we do things. Because I said so. And why did I say so? Because that's what I said before. And it would take a massive amount of creativity, a massive amount of consciousness, of liberation, of enlightenment, for me to think something new that I never thought before, that is more intelligent, meaning it produces less suffering and more well-being per unit of energy than what I did before. That takes iteration, it takes design. And we happen to be in a self-referential cult where we do not design the cult consciously. We don't begin a family system and start designing the family system very intelligently. In many cases, the parents have children and then they start arguing about which way the child is going to be raised. And in most cases, it's not an argument of what's best based on the data. It's an argument of my parents raised the families this way and celebrated Christmas this way and believes this religion and does this, and the other one saying, no, we're going to do it this way because that's what I did. And so there may be an argument about whose system to adopt, but there's very rarely an argument that analyzes all the best up-to-date data. That's quite an intelligent family system. If the contest is between whose data to listen to that is fresh off-the-press data about well-being for your benefit. And as a parent, it's much easier to treat you the way that I was treated because that's a default. I don't have to spend a single penny of effort or money to do that. I just feels natural. It feels familiar, meaning it feels like my family. And so if I was hit, which I was as a child, if I was shamed, which I was as a child, if I was threatened, which I was as a child, if I was tormented psychologically and physically and emotionally, if I was pushed away emotionally in the intense feelings of helplessness and pain, which I was, it will feel familiar. It will feel like family to do those things to you. I don't have to spend any effort. My body can do it in my sleep. But if, on the other hand, I change those patterns, I have to deal with a couple of things. First of all, I have to spend energy and I have to figure out what's the impact of the pattern. Never feels good. So I have to feel bad as a parent. I have to say, that felt terrible when my parents did that to me. So I have to remember that. And I don't want to remember that because it feels bad. Secondly, when I grasp that it feels bad, I've got to ask myself, if it felt so terrible and my parents saw me screaming, crying, flailing around, demonstrating all kinds of painful symptoms of their abuse, why did they do it anyway? And what the child in me, the child in every person says is because it's my fault. because I'm not lovable, because I'm not good enough. It's my fault. Now, that is a tremendously lonely and painful place to leave a child, and I was left there. So I have to feel that, and I don't want to feel that because it feels bad. It feels painful. Whereas if I just give those feelings to you unconsciously, I feel better, and I'm not remembering that, and you feel bad. And because in our cult, parenting is an overwhelming experience by design. So it takes several generations to share the responsibility of caring for an infant and doing a good job of it. But we've split up the generations. So it's going to put too much weight on me, the parent, and on your mother or my wife, who became your mother because I chose her as my wife. That's a good example. When my father didn't like what his wife was doing, he would blame me, and he would do it with language. He would say, your mother did this and this and this. What am I supposed to do? And then mom would come in and say, your father did this and this and this. What am I, at 6 years old, supposed to do? Because both of my parents were children, emotionally, psychologically, a lot of the time. Meaning they regressed into 5- and 6-year-olds squabbling for limited resources and this and that. And in their family system, whoever was the bad person got punished. And so their goal, when they're doing a bad job, is to make it look like the other person is the bad one. So they'll get punished and not themselves, right? And so who's the audience? The kids, right? So the kids are supposed to adjudicate between two squabbling children. So that was my parents. And it didn't feel very good, right? Because I had to grow up. I was put into, in a sense, the parental role, because they'd come and whine to the children, your dad did this, your mom did this, as if somehow we were the parents that would then punish the bad parent, and then the other scared little child in the other side would feel better. So that's not a very nice system to give on to you. But I've got to think, well, what would adults look like? Since my parents weren't adults, they were grown up, they had big, giant bodies, but they were children on the inside. I'd have to figure out what an actual competent parent would look like, because I haven't met one. I don't know what that looks like. Or I could just copy them, right? And so this is why you, as the initial innocent one, get a tremendous amount of unfair, abusive stupidity. Just as most children throughout history do and receive from their parents. And I apologize. I apologize to you. It's unfair. It's often cowardly. It's unnecessary. It's very, very painful. It's lonely to be forced into adulthood by two children. And it's incompetent. And your well-being depends on largely ignorant, idiotic, incompetent giants who are copying their cult, which is good enough to survive, but it is a long, long way from perfection. And in your adolescent stage, your job is to keep a diary of every fucking crap, fucked up, idiotic stupidity that you see in me, that you see in your parents, because it's all true. Your parents are fucked up. it isn't the best way to raise you. Nor was it particularly fair, nor was many elements of it carefully thought out. Now, here's the thing. As an adolescent, your job is to rebel and notate every flaw in the system, because you're going to inherit the system. And all of those flaws that you hate in me, that you hate in your cult, that you hate in your mother, all of those flaws are already inside your body at the age when you unconditionally accepted them, just like I did, just like your grandfather did, and your grandfather before that, your grandmother and grandfather. All of the flaws are already in your biology. They are now your default mode. And your sole hope of iterating the family system is that you take it to a little bit more artistry than my parents are fucked up losers. That's a start. But it's much too basic. Every intelligent child grasps these aspects of their parents. It doesn't take much. You're going to have to do better than that if you want to have the earned opportunity of setting yourself free from the family system that you despise because you do not yet know how to free yourself from it. And you have to earn that right. You must earn your freedom. And that's going to require you to become an adult, which most adolescents do not want to do. The adolescent stage of development is to notate the imperfections of the system in their parents and in their cult and their government and their school system and the prison system and all the shitty aspects of the cult. Good job. But the adolescent blames. It's your fault. You better change. You, the parent, had better fix the system. It's not good enough. It's not. And it isn't. Never is. And it never will be. It will never be good enough for your innocence. The innocence in the inner self, the innocence in the psyche, the innocence of every infant does not deserve the barbaric cruelty and stupidity that every infant on this planet receives to one degree or another. No infant deserves it. That's not the point. The point is, will that infant grow into an adolescent that not only lashes out and highlights and complains and laments about the unfairness and the crappy aspects of their parents? That's a start. But if you blame as an adolescent going into young adulthood and, my parents ruined my life, the system stays the same. You'll have children, perhaps, or be around other people, and they'll want you to embody something more worthwhile. But you can't because you've given all your power away. It was my parents' fault. Well, they're dead now. I'll be dead a couple of decades. So if I'm dead and it's all my fault, what do you do then? Your kids ask you why you shame them, why you torment them, why you do this stupid thing, and you say, because my dad was a jerk. What hope does that give to your children? None. You complain to me about all of my stupidity, and I say, I can't help it. My parents ruined my life. It's irritating. It's lazy, right? So you've got to decide, as an angry, rightfully irritated adolescent, whether you have the care for yourself, for the culture, and for your children. Do you have the care to get a little bit more specific in a couple of ways? Number one, will you take your criticisms of me into detail? Dane's a moron because he does this, and because he does this, and this produces this bad result, which is moronic. That's a start. Now you're doing your job as an adolescent. Antithesis and rebellion. That's your job. That's evolution's job through you. You're doing your job in the evolutionary process. But it does not become particularly useful. You are not useful to life and evolution unless you're willing to grow up sometime before the age of 25, hopefully before 21. And what does that growing up mean? It means you not only highlight the stupidity of everything around you, which is a good start, but you also design a better approach, number one. And you practice it, number two. And you see what your parents and everyone around you has dealt with. Why aren't people as intelligent as you, for example? Why? Well, when you try and iterate and do the way things should be done, you will experience something called cultural backlash. Now, all cults have a primary code that says we don't want to change. Why? Because this is who we are. How do you know that? Well, this is who we've been. And so this is who we are. And so this is who we must be. And it's that dumb. It doesn't get any more intelligent than that in most cases. This is the way it's done, because this is the way we did it before. And so this is the way it must be done, because that's who we are. You are going to be surrounded by a barrage of lazy, highly stupid people who they're satisfied with that equation. But you want to change the system that doesn't want to change because it's frightened of the unknown. It's frightened of change because it doesn't know what will happen. How will I recognize myself if we do it suddenly differently? Am I still an American if I start eating the Japanese diet, even though it's healthier? Fish and rice and vegetables and seafood is a healthier diet than pizza and apple pie and Coke. Much, much healthier. But if this is who I am, will I lose my identity because now I eat a healthier diet like they did in Japan? I'm not Japanese, so we have identity confusion. So for you to be useful, you've got to then be willing to diverge from the herd, right? The herd doesn't want to leave the herd. What defines the herd is normalcy. Everyone's doing, thinking, feeling, and saying the same thing. Now, in America, for example, it may look like there's a lot of diversity. But if you ask an American if their government is doing a good job, 95% of them will all say their government is doing a terrible job. They'll say they're doing a terrible job here for the. They may change the reasons. So there's a lot of conformity, right? If you ask, any number of things, you will find tremendous conformity, even in the seeming diversity. Why are thoughts so much more important than feelings in America? It's not intelligent. It's cult-like. Tell me what you were thinking is going to be asked 95% of the time, and nobody's going to want to know what you're feeling and why. Is that sane? No, of course not. It's absurd. But it's normal. Now, if you diverge from the norm in order to become more sane, more intelligent, because you know best, you've now got a challenge because many of your family members and peers and stuff don't want to be more intelligent. They want to be normal. So if you then join the herd again because you've given up on being different and you don't like the isolation and you notice that you're not invited to certain parties because you're actually thinking and the group that's getting together at the party does not want to think, they want to reiterate the cult-like nature they were given and you're ruining the party. Well, maybe you're tempted to give up on intelligence and go back to the normalcy of stupidity. So maybe your parents did the same thing, right? So for you to be useful and actually put all of your criticisms to work, you've got to come up with better ways of doing things. You've got to try them out. This is all effort, iteration, design, etc. You got to see what doesn't work and what works. And you've got to reach the point going upstream from the cult, spending more energy than most of the people in the cult. You've got to come up with a better way of doing things than the majority. And when you can embody that and practice it, you'll discover a couple of things. First of all, you're not perfect with all that effort. Number two, plenty of people may fight you just because you're different, which isn't any fun. And number three, some of your old habits may come back. You may get tired of swimming upstream from the cult and trying to find, an organic restaurant in a sea of junk food. And it's like, fine, let's just eat some junk food. Well, that's why your parents, that's why I'm flawed. That's why you're flawed. And so what you'll see is that over time, family systems and cults iterate. They become a little less crazy. So this little drawing here gets knocked out, and maybe it gets a little bit more symmetrical. It's a little bit better. And then you pass it on to your kids, and they get fed up with this bump in here. What's all this crap? Well, maybe they design it a little bit more better than that for their kids. But then their kids complain about these bumps. Driving this kind of car, you see these corners here? Those are bumpy rides. It's a little bit more symmetrical, but it's still bumpy. Oh, their kids will be furious at them. Why can't it be smooth? And why did you have to do this? And why did you have to do this? And their kids may smooth out some of the bumps. They may add some points in and feel really pleased with themselves because, when they were being raised, it was horrible, but now they've made it 50% better. That's not how their kids experience it. And there's a good reason for this, by the way. When you are born into a more intelligent house, your brain becomes more sensitive. So if you grow up in driving this wheel, this is not a perfect wheel, but it's a lot better than a square wheel, right? Now, if you grow up driving this wheel, you will start to notice the imperfections here. Like this should be a little bit more curved out here. And that's a little bump right there. You'll notice you'll zero in. The brain constantly zeroes into what's wrong. So if there's not much wrong, it gets more sensitive. And it tunes into what's wrong of the not much wrong. Now the same is true in reverse. If you take a child that's growing up in this square family, That's a fucking bumpy ride. You try driving in a car at 70 miles an hour with 4 square wheels. It is hell for a while. Then you get used to it. You develop calluses. You tune stuff out. You go mildly deaf. You tune stuff out. And then it's normal. I didn't notice it. I live near the train tracks, screeching, clanking, horrible dissonant sounds of the bell. And it's terrible. What? Oh, I didn't notice it. I've been living next to the train track for years. I had no idea. And so we adjust. However fucked up our family is, we get used to it. We assume everyone deals with that. However fine-tuned our family is, relatively speaking, it's all relative. We just zoom into more details. Like, look at this little tail here where the circle connects. This is a disaster, to the adolescent of the family, that's occupying this. Now, if a parent has taken a square system and turned it into this bumpy round system, the parent is, thinks they're the second coming, right? Like you've never seen it like I did. I grew up with bumpy wheels, but the teenager of their family doesn't know what it was like to be them. They're attuned to the imperfections of this family, so it never ends. Nothing is perfect in physical reality, number one. No system is perfect by definition. Everyone's using a system, and however perfect the system is relative to some other imperfect system, the person who grows up in that system will amplify every imperfection to a large extent as if it is the biggest thing in the world. Why? Because it is. Every child understands that the flaws of their system could have killed them, and they're pissed off about it, as they should be. That's how evolution works. And so your job is to take the imperfection of your system and see if you can delete this and refine this. And this all takes work. Maybe you got that bit off there, but now you've got a new flaw because you're the first person of your generation to give that a shot. Feelings were illegal for several generations before you. You start talking about feelings, but you never got any good role models, so you do a crappy job talking about feelings. And your adolescent kids notice how crappy you are and give you a hard time about it. That's the way it works. That's the way evolution works. And so your job is to become an adult. And an adult is basically this. The child accepts everything unconditionally. The adolescent, probably the time this is the most useful time to hear this, the adolescent rejects everything. It's all fucked up in the adolescent's eye. They see every little imperfection about everything. Good. You're making progress. You no longer put your parents on a pedestal and not blindly accept that they know what they're doing. They don't. Now you know what dickheads they are, right? And so you've got it all worked out, how fucked up and dumb your parents are. Good. You're doing your job. But you're still immature. Your job is to move to the third phase. That's adulthood. Now, both the child and adolescent are extreme. Sympathy blindly, antipathy reactively. It's extreme. Your job is to unify this with synthesis. So, synthesis. And that's your job. As to become an adult, you've got to do two things. You've got to make a list and take inventory of your cult, of your family system. And you have to come up with the best of what you've learned. I like granola. I'm no longer going to eat fast food pizza, but I'm going to eat granola and blueberries, for example. Whatever it is. I like that. And then you come over to the antipathy and you say, I hate the way my parents were so hypocritical and couldn't even admit that they were wrong. See, my parents couldn't even admit that they were wrong. So I said, fuck that. I'm going to admit that I'm wrong. So I'm doing that. So I've rejected that form of hypocrisy. But it's not a perfect system. Now, you have an imperfect father who admits that he's imperfect and is still imperfect. It's like, if you admit it, why don't you change it? Well, because I don't have enough time and energy to know how to change all these things, right? I've changed this bit and this bit, but there's so many things to change, and you're annoyed that I didn't change the thing I haven't gotten around to changing. That'll be your job in the family system as you go forward. You'll change that bit if you have the decency, or you'll just blame me for ruining your life and you'll stay a child and adolescent the rest of your life. So I like the fact that my parents had a house. That was a nice iteration, but they grew up homeless. Now they had a house. I like that bit. I'm going to have a house for my family. I do not like sitting around drinking beer, watching sports, and getting fat. No, I'm sick of that. I like the English language. I don't like lies, right? Your job as an adult, in the becoming of an adult, is to create a brand new identity that is a composite and a synergy of the best parts that kept you alive in the family system that you got from me and your cult, and rejects the worst things. Why is Dane always so self-important? I want to have a sense of humor, so you do this. You add that, right? And now you've got a new identity that contains good parts from the old identity. You're not reinventing every aspect of the monetary system and all that. I'll accept dollar bills, but I will not run my life for money. I will not be a prostitute every hour of the day for work I hate doing because I'm afraid. I reject that. So, and when you reject it, you're not still an adult. You're getting there. You have to replace it with something new. Instead, I will do this, and this, and this, and this. These things I will do. I will not do this. I will do this, and these are the new things I will do. And now you must master confidence through experience and practice and integrity. You've decided you're going to always tell the truth. You're not going to be a jerk to your kids. Okay, fine, good decision. Now you've got to get good at that. You can't just tell your kids I'm a perfect parent and behave, like a dickhead. I mean, you've got to actually now get good at that. And in the process, you will see how you perform. Now, you can either get good at it, or you can punish your kids for revealing your inevitable flaws. I think that's there may not be quite as much evolution between generation and generation as you might hope. And when your kids are an adolescent, they'll rub all that crap that you shoved down their throat, and you'll have to deal with it, or lose the respect of your family if you're too cowardly to face the aspects that you need to deal with to satisfy your adolescent that you give rise to. And so now you're an adult. You're not blaming the system, your parents, the world. You're appreciative for the good parts of the world and the system of the parents. You're appreciative. And you have rejected and noted the flaws, good work, as an adolescent. And now you've become an adult because you've invented new ways of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And there's one more part to being an adult. You've got to do it independently. You've got to create the confidence and mastery to live in this new way on your own. That's why you're not an adult as long as you're whining to me. Oh, why can't you? Why do you have to do this? Why do you have to ruin my life? Every adolescent's life is ruined. That's the nature of an adolescent, because you're still depending on others. And to some extent, that's appropriate. So whine away. But understand that you haven't made it. You haven't become really important in evolution unless you not only identify and reject my flaws and the flaws of the cult, but you've done it better, consistently better, and you've demonstrated it by meeting your human needs. So what are your human needs? To survive? I've given you that. You've got to figure out how to survive on your own. Security of survival, I've given you that. The system, your fucked up family system has given you survival and security of survival. You're here. Love and belonging. You've gotten some of that in some form. From me, from the system, from the cult. You've got to figure out how to love yourself and how to create love and belonging of the new you outside of the family system. You've got to figure that out. Self-esteem, you've got to earn that. You've got to figure out what your values are, what your ideals are, what your principles are. I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this because that takes me closer to my ideals. You've got to figure that out. And then you've got to have the decency and character and self-respect to do what you plan to do reliably. Now you'll have self-esteem. You'll earn and respect yourself. You've got to figure out what your gifts and abilities were. If I didn't have any gifts and abilities, you wouldn't have a roof over your head. You've got to figure out about your gifts and abilities. You got to figure that out. And you got to get good at them. And then you've got to learn to bring them into the world so that other people can understand your value and why your talents are useful. You got to do that. You got to show other people that. And then you've got to create abundance from that for you and for other people within the current system. It's no good you inventing the Hoken currency. I mean, if nobody else is interested, nobody else will accept your token. You've got to create interest in your token so that you have abundance. And only then can you become part of evolution, something bigger than yourself, the planet, the ecology, a tradition, a family, a culture, a country. Can you be of service, of use to the system that gave birth to you by transcending it, by becoming part of something bigger than your cult, than your own personal identity? You've got to figure out how to do that. And then you are an adult. And you've got to figure out how to do that in a cult that isn't very helpful. A cult that's getting you to watch shame-based commercials, that's trying to addict you to Facebook, that's trying to addict you to all kinds of ridiculous thing that's called news. If it's not benefiting your life or the life of those you care about, it is not news for you. It can be called news, but it's just adrenaline junk. Unless you do something in response to it that's useful to your well-being and the well-being of those you care about, it isn't news. It's just junk. You've got to do something for it to be newsworthy in your world. So you may have to think about all kinds of things. So this is your journey. And as you get lost in addiction, as you get lost in distraction and diversion, as you get uncomfortable with the fear of the unknown, you will understand why your parents and their parents and their parents got off track, why they're such smucks, considering how important you are and the way you deserve to be raised. You understand that It was much easier to have another drink than to start worrying about this and go home and figure out what your talents were in a culture that doesn't want to know. And learn how to sell those talents in a cult that doesn't teach you how to sell. Learn to be an adult in a cult that raises children and adolescents to whine and depend on codependent governments to rescue them or punish them, depending on whether you're Democrat or Republican. You may understand that it's a difficult job, being an adult, being an individual, being part of evolution. And when you do it all, become an adult, become part of evolution, you will have the privilege, perhaps, if you have children, of listening to how fucked up you are, that you didn't do it good enough for them, and you didn't. You still didn't do it good enough for the innocence, for the divine king and queen that is born in every infant. You didn't do it good enough. And they, if they grow up, if you take this message to you and pass it on, they'll become something a little bit more. Maybe they'll have a nicer tone to it, more useful facts, book list that I didn't give to you. Maybe you'll give that to them, and they'll give something more profound to their children. That's how evolution works. So nobody may teach you this. Nobody taught me this. But at 46 years old, these are some of the things that I wish my incompetent, horrible parents, from my adolescent point of view, could get off their butts and provide for me. They didn't do it. And I'm doing it for you, and it's not perfect. And that's the way systems are. No system is perfect. It's not personal. It's an inherited algorithm. It's a cult with a lot of suffering, a lot of loneliness, a lot of fear of suffering and loneliness. And you can be driven by that fear into an addiction, into avoidance, into numbing out, into not thinking. Or you can grow up and do something about it. What I want for you, my child, and every person watching this video, is I want you to grow up and do something about it. Not by punishing yourself, not by shaming yourself, but by taking inventory of what you've been given. By rebelling and rejecting the core assets, the core negatives, by embracing the core assets, by reinventing the negatives into something better, by becoming happy, by taking care of your survival, your security, your love and belonging, your self-esteem, understanding your gifts, developing them, bringing them abundantly into the world so that I and others can celebrate them, can envy them, can admire them, can copy them, can enjoy them, can reward you for them, so that you create abundance. I want you to serve something bigger, naturally. Don't force yourself. You're not there yet. When you have that abundance of all your other needs being met, you will yearn for something beyond the limited scope of your own ego. You'll yearn to be a spiritual adult, to understand that you are a part of all things. You were born out of the possibility field of all that is. You are an innate part of all that is. All that is could not exist without you, because it wouldn't be all that is without you. I want to see you recognize that awareness and to become who you are. A great one, part of something much bigger than your cult, than your family system, than your identity. That's my wish for you, and I bless you. I celebrate you. I salute the tremendous courage it takes to progress on this path. It is a hero's journey, facing death, facing the unknown, to move towards something great, to hopefully see you return as a hero, as a heroine, and bring the fruits of your journey back to the cult that you left to find out who you are. And I'm proud of you for the tremendous courage, beauty, initiative it takes to go on this path. It is life's path, and you are a part of it. Hi, I'm Dan Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.